All right, giving it one more try. Third is a charm. I'm trying to get Tom into the channel. Um, let's see. So today we're talking about individuation, enlightenment, liberation, and so forth. I'm having technical difficulties. Here we go. Okay, Tom. Got it. Okay, it's happening. Is it happening? I accepted. Why? Why?
Hello.
Oh, freaking thank you, baby Jesus. It's been, can I just say, it's been a day for me. Okay. Well, so glad to have you here, Tom. For those who don't know, hold on, now I have to fix this thing. Great. You know, today, just everything is too much today. 1 second. It's one of those days. I already spent 2.5 hours in a class, like right before this, my Jungian class. So my brain is already like, I'm already at a lesser capacity, but hopefully it's gonna go well. Tom, right.
Yes.
So Tom is a practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism for many, many years. He was the director of education for one of the prominent Buddhist organizations, FPMT, for over 10 years. And he's like a scholar. He reads books that are this thick, and he loves them. And he's also very well versed in Western Hermetic tradition and other things. So, Tom, welcome. Thank you so much for making it
Thank
here.
you
Uh,
so much.
Sorry for bugging out as we were trying to get this going. Okay, so today, like I said, we're talking about individuation. First and foremost, that's been the
Mhm.
original request. And I took this opportunity to kind of branch into other interpretations of that concept from the perspective of Buddhist tradition, where this concept is much more developed and more elaborated on. And then we're also going to bring in Western Hermetic tradition and Chinese system too, right? Are we bringing that into like Zen Buddhism,
Absolutely.
Taoism? Okay, a little bit of everything. This is going to be good stuff, so I'm
So
excited.
hopefully, mhm.
Okay, so first things first, let's just quickly go over, the question was people want to know more about individuation. Individuation is Jung's term for enlightenment. And individuation represents a type of integration of personality where we become whole. And, if we say that we're trying to become whole, that indicates that we are at this time fragmented. And according to Jungian sort of interpretation, individuation is making all of our unconscious content conscious. So that means that, that actually implies that much of our behavior day to day, our decision making, reactions, and so forth, springs from the place of unconscious. And even when we engage in doing certain activities, we think we operate from kind of one motivation, but then there is this an entire hidden element of like hidden motivations of the ego and the shadow and so forth. Um,
And
so,
I think Jung talked about the process of individuation as actually shedding the false wrappings of the persona, the habits and the fake pieces that we've constructed for ourselves to deal with the world. And in order, by shedding that garbage, we then can come and get in touch with the true nature of our personality, and the way that we actually are constructed.
mhm. Then that's because that's a really great point, because I don't want to, when we talk about ego has kind of a bad rap, and I'm just gonna, this should be common knowledge, but it's not really, so I'm just gonna bring it up again. The concept of ego in psychology is not the same as concept of ego in spirituality. So when we talk about annihilating the ego, what we're referring to the aspect of the ego that's problematic. It's the aspect of the ego that's insecure, that's kind of like, it's like the automatic self-protective program that's been running around, since we were cave dwelling human animals. And so we're trying to kind of uplift, integrate, kind of enlighten that aspect of the ego. And honestly, we can't annihilate anything that's part of us. You can either transform it and integrate it, or it stays where it is. There is no going away with something that's there, right? So you can only transmute it.
I think
And
Jung said about the shadow mainly, but most psychological content, like the four ways we could deal with things are either denial, projection, integration, or transmutation.
say it again. Denial.
Denial, projection, integration, and transmutation.
Okay. Yeah. Good stuff. Yeah.
And I think
So,
that integration, that's kind of what you're hinting at there a lot. Talking about the persona, the identity or ego doesn't need to be completely annihilated. It becomes part of
well,
something
it
bigger.
can't be annihilated. It cannot be. There is no
Right.
way. There is something you don't like about yourself. It's not going anywhere. So, the way to work with something like that would be like a good example for that would be a complex. It would be like parts of our uh, being that are acting out, that are kind of autonomous. And the way, just really quick, that's like a really big subject, but just to quickly kind of, and that's also part of individuation, integrating complexes and so forth. But the first thing we have to do is see them. We have to first acknowledge that they're there versus saying like, what are you saying? I'm not that kind of a person. And it's like, like, which is denial, right? So we want to first be willing to see it. If we're not willing to see it, we're not going to see it. Because ego is very self-protective, and it doesn't want to own up to things that we don't like. So we first got to kind of eat some humble pie, develop some self-compassion, and say, hey, it's okay that I'm imperfect. See the thing, and then once we see it, then only then we can begin to transform it. And also, based on what was the first thing you said? I just had a point to make and I never got to it. There was the first comment you made about what it means to the individuation is about going away with false aspects of ourselves, right? That's what you said.
Right. Shedding the false wrappings of the
So
persona.
in regards to that, I wanted to say that ego, the voice of ego, can be kind of a liar, and I don't want to say a whole ego, but the problematic aspect of the ego, because ego is self-protective, and it basically, part of that is protecting us from pain and discomfort. So anything that brings up discomfort, we want to get away from, including seeing things about ourselves that we don't like. So we'll tell ourselves stories, or it's like, so from that perspective, small ego can be a liar, basically, and without us even really being fully aware of that, like that stuff can be on the fringe of consciousness. So then, it becomes really tricky. And the process of becoming capable of seeing the ego is gradual, or seeing this kind of problematic aspects is
Mhm.
gradual. And like I said, there are two things that come to mind immediately, how to uh, get to a place of really being able to see ourselves as we really are. One is practice of meditation, where we practice just sitting and kind of in stillness and just watching our mind. Whereas in the process of that, we just suddenly, eventually over time, start to see things directly. And the other thing is self-compassion. Without self-compassion, your ego, small ego, will not let you see itself. So, okay.
And I think a useful analogy there is in Taoism, the idea of a type of enlightenment, very similar to individuation. They use this kind of a symbol of like contents settling in a muddy pond, and that our true nature is always there. But it's, we're so busy, and there's so many, the murkiness of daily life clouds things. So that meditation allows those things to settle, and then we can get in tune with a deeper sense of self.
Right. And it's like, it's that metaphor of like stirring the water.
Mhm.
So like when we're kind of like reacting to things and we're very busy, the busy mind is just kind of like reacting to everything and creating monologue, and it's like stirring the muddy water, when the emotions are kind of volatile, it's like stirring the water, and then it's like you can't see anything. But when in stillness, the mud settles and the water becomes translucent.
Mhm.
um, Another thing that's not really talked much about, at least in the mainstream world, in Jungian world, yes, but in a mainstream
Mhm.
world, no, is that our unconscious contains uh, aspects of ourselves that are opposite of how we are in our kind of ego. Okay, well, first, backtrack. I just want to say ego is the kind of central sense of self. It's like the center of our self-awareness. So from the psychological perspective, so like you can never go away with the ego from that perspective. Like you'd have to kill yourself to go away with the ego. There is no way. I mean, maybe if you're like a vegetable person, you can be alive without it, but I don't even know, maybe even that them have some kind of, they may have still some sense of self. So, um, so the way we are in our conscious life, like, I have a sense of myself, like I am an assertive kind of person. I have a lot of energy, blah, 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 right? So this is like we have these attributes that we use to define ourselves or how we think of ourselves. Our unconscious is the opposite of our conscious. So if I'm very assertive in my conscious life, my unconscious would be yielding. If I am or and maybe more like pacified, maybe I don't know what's like the opposite of assertive. It could also be shy, but
Submissive.
anyway, in the same way, like a masculine, very masculine man, in his in his ego, if he's very masculine, his unconscious will be very feminine. So now there is something interesting here to unpack. If individuation is making unconscious conscious, that means we're tapping into aspects of ourselves that are less developed and less pronounced. So actually what comes to mind is in BDSM, it's a very common sort of thing, that you have people who are very successful, not in BDSM, in just in general, in like even in sexuality, right? People who are very much in control. They carry the world on their shoulders. They're in charge of a lot of people. So like a lot of CEOs or very assertive people, right? In a sexual situations, they, if they're really in touch with their sexuality and their kind of secret fantasies, they will be kind of yearning to be more submissive in a sexual context. I mean, I've worked as a intimacy coach for about 20 years, and I'm speaking from experience of working with people for a very long time. And there is something really interesting about that, whereas in those kinds of situations where people are allowed to explore their less pronounced aspect of themselves, it brings about balancing. So actually, things that people experience in sort of BDSM context can be very healing for the personality. And I'm sorry, Tom, I know I'm like coming in with a lot of info. I just wanted to make a full circle of what I said earlier about unconscious containing our less pronounced latent tendencies and capacities and so forth. As we're doing the work of integration, individuation, what we're doing is we're getting to see uh, parts of ourselves that, like I said, are less developed. And this actually means that we, within ourselves, like our sort of self with a capital S, um, which is our holistic being, who we really are, and the self encompasses both conscious and unconscious. So it's like, it's a kind of the big scale of who we are. It contains every possible thing there is in terms of like psychological expression and so forth, right? So when we project on somebody else, when we see behavior in others that we dislike, and that really triggers us, the reason why we react to it is because that's our shadow. And our
Mhm.
shadow contains those elements that we dislike, but we don't want to see them, so they're suppressed, right? So,
Absolutely.
from that perspective, all of the things that we see, good and evil, and like all the positive and negative qualities, every uh what do you call that, like every combination of
Mhm.
qualities there is contained in ourselves. It's just that not all of it is contained in the conscious, right? It's rather in the unconscious. So as we discover all of these elements that belong, we kind of reclaim them, we acknowledge them, then in the process of individuation, those things are not going to manifest in a kind of unrefined, unwholesome way, because as we become conscious, we integrate, right? That's the idea. And then from that point on, person who is totally integrated and individuated will have access to every kind of quality. The person could be both assertive and yielding at the same time. And they will choose what is most appropriate in the situation and resort to that rather than compulsively falling into like a habit. So that's something I hope, did that make sense? I kind of used a lot of words to say that, but.
To maybe put it a different way, in Buddhism, there's a particular practice called severance, Che. And in this practice, people work with angels and demons. But these ideas are really, they're the inflated emotions that we have either deified and put up on pedestals, or that we've sublimated, put into our shadow, and that we can't deal with. And the word inflation is used quite a bit. So in this practice, we go to the places that scare us, usually because this is more potent than going to the places that impress us and are holy. Um, but especially to dredge up some of that, the inflated, suppressed emotion or desire or whatever, um, psychic content that we aren't ready to deal with. And in this practice, not only do we call upon them, we get to know them, and we actually start to feed them from our own body, which, that goes a lot further in the process. But the idea is that we're not just acknowledging these elements of ourselves that we can't deal with, but actually nurturing them and, bonding with them in a sense that it really points to individuation, this idea of integration, I think.
Yeah, it's like Lama Tsultrimalioni, who is supposedly a
Mhm.
reincarnation of the yogini who created Chill practice. And by the way, Tom, do you want to tell them just a little bit, for people who don't know, what does Chill practice looks like? Just in a nutshell, like a quick overview.
Sure, sure.
And yeah,
Really quickly, one first engages in a practice where the border of the mind between space and the self is relaxed. So we kind of let our edges bleed out. This is called
dissolve.
Mahamudra. And then we return and we visualize ourselves with those demons, with those gods, with the inflated elements of our psyche. They come forth and we try to visualize them in a way. And then we do a practice where we leave our body, become one with the highest levels of what our potentiality is, and while seeing the remnants of our body, we chop it up into pieces and we offer that as food to the gods and the demons that comprise our bigger self. So this is part of that nurturing aspect. And you can spend a lot of time doing specific pieces of this, but the whole idea is that uh, we're bringing a sense of compassion to our entire psyche, and
Including
allowing
the
ourselves.
demons. And yeah,
Exactly.
you don't discriminate against the demons. You don't say like you can't join the feast. Only the Buddhists.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And,
everybody. And
and this helps. It also helps create this sense of space in the mind for kind of a superordinate personality, a higher self that's able to orchestrate all of these other elements of the self and is not subject to them.
Yeah, and also we oh hold on, let me let me turn on do not
She's disappeared.
here. I just set up do not disturb because okay, now okay, here we go. I had somebody texting me and I forgot to set up do not disturb mode on my phone. Let us remember that the language of the unconscious is images. So when we do this practice, cho, which translates to severance and specifically referring to severing ego grasping, right? And what do we grasp to the most? Our identity and our body, right? So when we do this practice, this Buddhist practice, you know, it's all happening inside of our mind. We're not really chopping your body up here. You're visualizing the whole process. And so you're like communing with your unconscious and kind of giving it almost like instructions, like you're kind of priming it to
Mhm.
eventually get to a place where you really do become, where you get to a place of severing the ego grasping. And just to define, so ego grasping refers to this like very tense sense of self. So for example, like people who are really easily triggered and reactive, like if somebody says something and they're immediately, oh, what, you know what, I do, you know, it's like that's like really heavy duty ego grasping. Or like another, I mean, we all have that, right? It's just more or less depends on a person. And spiritual practice is supposed to help us reduce ego grasping, you know. And ego grasping is directly related to the program, the software of the small ego
Mhm.
that's very self-protective. So, you know, and that software is really kind of based on delusion, you know, that we're separate, that we're like this kind of like that we're in danger, that we have to only look out for ourselves. Like this is just like this kind of anyway.
Well,
So
this,
spirituality as we go along is supposed to loosen that mechanism. It's supposed to show us and demonstrate over time that there is like huge interconnectedness between me and others, and then there are teachings on karma which are very helpful. And you know, as I've been studying, you know, for over 2 decades, like concept of karma, it's now finally for me starting to think on a more intuitive level that like it really is so. Like I'm starting to feel that this concept of like, you know, we're not the ego of course is horribly afraid of death, because for small ego that's like, oh, it's the end of me, how could that be, oh my god, like I, you know, it's like we're like but you know, karma and reincarnation, that's what I was going to talk about. Karma and reincarnation teaches that, you know, we can, you know, after we die it's not the end. It's just like in physics we know that energy can neither be destroyed nor created, it can only pass from one form to another. So
Mhm.
like of course, you know, look at me, I'm just energy vibrating through, you know, if I, when I die, my body is just a shell, so that means energy left. So you we're definitely a form of energy. um and So for me, just my personal experience is that like I've gotten to be, I used to be afraid of that when I was a kid. I used to have this notion that like when you die you end up in this dark place all by yourself for all eternity. I don't know where I got this idea from, but it was like terrifying to me. You know, and that's like a very kind of the primitive ego kind of, you know, the primitive part of self is very uh, driven by these ignorant, fearful notions. But
Well,
I'm like, so just what I was, sorry to finish my, I know I'm going on a tangent, but just something's happening, like after studying and practicing, it's loosening. The practice that I've been doing has been loosening this like fearful grasping, so that now the concept of death doesn't seem like the end of the world, because it just, you know, I know it's just going to be like a new beginning. You know, the death of one thing is just the beginning of a new thing. So
right.
that kind of makes us more relaxed, you know, with the ego grasping. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking.
I think what you're also kind of you're bringing up is that, you know, often whether we're talking in psychology or personal spiritual development, any of these things, as we're as we grow up, we kind of are forced to make things work. And, you know, we develop an individual identity that has solutions to certain problems that we face, and that works for a little while. But as we get older and as we start to evolve and emerge and become more sophisticated, though that identity doesn't serve us necessarily all that well anymore. And, you know, but of course it's comfortable and it works. It's able to make some sense of the universe.
You know, you can go to
So,
work and do
right.
your job, and you know, right.
So when we challenge that, of course, you know, it's important that it defends itself because this has gotten us this far, you know, and of course we have to be thankful for that because otherwise we wouldn't
Yeah,
be here.
it wouldn't
But
function. Mm.
in the same way, like that identity is formed out of biological necessity almost. You know, and now individuation is the process of starting to get bigger, starting to make choices based on intention and not just out of necessity. And, you know, the things that we enjoy, the things that we don't enjoy, the different pieces of our personality can actually become much richer and much deeper because they're allowed to thrive and follow their you know instinct or their momentum. Um, but of course, that resistance that we face can become very strong and very entrenched. So, you know, this process of individuation, whether we're talking about psychology or liberation and enlightenment, it's always a graduated path. You know, it takes steps and steps because each time you reset the system, it has to reform, you know, and recongeal back into an operating system that works again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you integrate these new pieces. And then once that's like working again, then you bite off the next piece, you
Right.
know?
And I was gonna, this kind of brings to mind this idea that, you know, we are rational people and we need to be rational to function in the society. But
Right.
enlightenment isn't rational. It's not reasonable at all because, you know, we have this ego, you know, and when I say ego, I'm referring both to positive and negative aspects of ego, right? We have kind of a self-preservation impulse, and of course there is also I want so there is a difference between like being really selfish and just being self-absorbed and stepping on other people, right, and having like a healthy sense of self where like you're not gonna let people just walk all over you, right? So there is a kind of, there are aspects of self-preservation that are and that's, yeah, that are, you know, some we'll call it like selfish because it's self-absorbed. It's by self-absorbed I mean it's directed at the self, right?
There's the psychologist Mark Epstein. He drew a comparison between the Buddhist Four Noble Truths and the individuation process. And he defined it as a process of narcissism, where we first create a variety of narcissism. It inevitably is humiliated and doesn't
Mm.
work. And then the truth that we could grow to have a identity that's bigger than that becomes evident. And then we take steps toward that growth. But that, you know, using narcissism as a kind of the seed, because you are looking to serve the self, you are looking for self-preservation. But, you know, the ratiocination, like finding the middle way where that works, but it's only works to a certain extent. You know, this is the balance, and
Well,
that's kind of the process.
here's the thing. So this is why I made a distinction between like obnoxiously
Right.
self-absorbed, unethical, like stepping on other people, and sort of the healthy version where you're just like, you understand. It's like in the airplane, you have to put a mask on yourself before you put it on other people, because how are you going to save others if you like, if you run out of oxygen, right? So it's actually very logical,
Of
right?
that
uh,
example.
and actually, also what I came to find out, that's part of building a healthy ego, right? So healthy ego is a sense of self that's like, I like the word fair. Being fair means like you consider others, but you also consider yourself. That means you're not enabling other people's good or bad behavior at the expense of your own well-being, because that's just stupid. Okay, that's not okay, I don't want to say in that kind of way. It's unwise. And when we do that, it doesn't come from the rational place, it comes from the place of traumatized sense of self. So apologies, I don't want to say stupid, but you could say it like that, but that's, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Because stupid refers to something rational, and this is not rational. So from that
And I
perspective,
think at no point is it ever willfully harmful. It's just that it's not big enough to see,
with ignorance, it's a kind of ignorance,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
we all have many different kinds of ignorance. But my point is, and I always say this, and it came, I really came to understand this, is that transcendence can only happen with a healthy ego. You can't go from being like super pathological to transcendent. No, you have to first become healthy, kind of get a healthy sense of self, healthy sense of self-love and care, in order to kind of shed that. So that's
And I think,
something that's,
yeah,
and I
that
think it's
answers, there's a
consistent
question
with
in
what
the
Mark is saying.
comment. Yeah, yeah, I think that doesn't allow you to be taken advantage of in a way that is unfair to yourself. That you don't, those causes and conditions can't arise when you're being fair.
Yes. Um, exactly. And sorry, I always get thrown off when I look at comments, because like it throws me off, and I'm always like, I'm not gonna look at comments because I wanted to see if anybody had any questions. But yeah, okay. So having said that, let's see. Um, Yes. So what I was saying earlier is that, like, you know, that's rational, right? Now, when we jump, now I'm kind of making a leap, and we can backtrack. But in Buddhism, right? When we talk about enlightenment, and we're gonna actually, we should probably dive into that now. But I do want to mention that, like, in Buddhist tradition, in order to reach enlightenment, there are two wings that you have to kind of develop: the wing of wisdom and the wing of compassion. Wisdom refers to just perceiving reality as it is versus how we perceive it now, which is through a filter of the small ego. And the compassion refers not just to like empathy, right? That's not what's talked about. It's a kind of heightened kind of level of love that's not based in the ego, and it's called bodhicitta. And Tom can kind of expound on this further, but I just wanted to mention in the context of this thing that, like, enlightenment isn't reasonable and rational. When you read stories about the Buddha, during his previous incarnations before he became a Buddha, right? He was like a high level bodhisattva, a high level being. And, there was this story where, I don't know, he was in a jungle and there was a mother tiger who was dying, and she had cubs. They were starving. So he offered his body to feed the tiger and her cubs. And like, that sounds completely idiotic if you're a rational person, because you're like, I'm not gonna like go kill myself to feed, a wild animal to make sure it doesn't suffer, right? But actually, there is kind of a hidden teaching in this, and it's also like a clue. And the thing is, like I said, enlightenment isn't rational and reasonable, because rational idea is that, we want to be healthy, be well, live as long as possible, have a wholesome life, have, joyful existence, right? But as we're on the path, uh, it's a hard to talk about, but the personal ego over time, eventually, what happens is that the personal, when we reach that full point of like healthy ego and integration, the personal ego starts to shed, and what replaces it is this kind of like larger self with a capital S, or kind of divine self. And on the tree of life, for those of you who are familiar with the Kabbalistic tree of life, that's the domain of Tiferet. That's like in the middle of the tree. That's in between, the Malkuth, which is the earthly physical domain, and the place of divinity, Kether. So in this kind of sphere, we start to we have a realization that there is no division between self and other, that like others are in fact extensions of ourselves, and we're all immortal. Like we're just kind of like recycled energy, and we keep coming back, and there is no ego grasping, there is no fear of death, there is none of that, right? So what happens is, the story of the Buddha is supposed to signify this idea, or this kind of concept of bodhicitta, which is an attainment on the path of sort of great compassion, wherein we have so much love and compassion for other beings, and see them as kind of extensions of ourselves, that we won't think twice in undermining ourselves for the sake of them. However, if we do this now, it's neurosis. It's not healthy, it's pathological. But after we transcend, it's like a logical thing, it's spontaneous. So it's very important to understand the difference between these two things. Yeah, so anyway, I don't know if you want to backtrack and talk a little bit about, we have a lot to unpack about Buddhist enlightenment, what it means. So I don't know how we want to get into that, but I guess I started a little bit.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, I think the development of enlightenment is kind of the path in Buddhism. It's not something that tomorrow you're fully enlightened, and this idea that there's something called instantaneous enlightenment versus gradual enlightenment. This is a debate that has split the philosophies of whole nations, even their politics, in Asia. And when you study it, what it really looks like, what it comes down to, is a gradual process of instantaneous moments of enlightenment. So you get a little taste, you return back to normal, and then you try to work that in and figure out how to make this part of your awareness and your consciousness. And then you have another experience, and this continues to happen. In Japanese, in Zen Buddhism, the concept is called Kensho and Satori. Kensho is the first moment of realization, of self-nature, of seeing the true I. That's how they kind of
Of
refer to it. And
non-existent
Satori,
I, that it's merely labeled, right?
well,
It's like seeing after this
true
imperfect.
nature, which true nature doesn't have an I necessarily,
Mm-hmm.
labeled to it. It's a taste of something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
It's a dilation of consciousness in a way. And of course, that doesn't stay. It can last for a few days sometimes, but usually, the mind kind of tightens back up again, and we return to our patterns to some degree. The idea in Zen is that we continually cultivate this path. We have more and more satori, more and more of these experiences, and they deepen. And each time we shed more of those layers, the packaging, like that Jung says in integration. We're shedding these pieces of forced programming that aren't necessarily serving us any longer. And in so doing, the borders of who we are expand. So, this idea of compassion, like Lon is talking about, becomes more and more healthy. It becomes more and more reasonable and attainable and sustainable, because it's not based on I want to make sure everybody else is happy so they like me. It's not a neurotic or a
Mm-hmm.
compulsive drive.
Mm-hmm.
It's that we less and less feel a border between
Mm-hmm.
ourselves and others. And so, like you said, that's not a rational
Right.
experience. That's not something you would ask for usually. And
Yeah.
if you do, you're probably neurotic. But so like what Lana's saying, and I think this connects with a lot of the different spiritualities, is that we're, slowly, like you're getting toward the heart of the onion. Or maybe a better idea is that you're going from the heart of the onion out, and that you're crossing layers and getting into newer and newer fields. But at the same time, that heart is still there. It's just bigger now. And
Mm,
that center still remains. You
interesting.
can't kill those demons,
Hmm.
but that you can integrate them. And this is, I think, the idea of integration that Jung talks about, is that we, a personality can never be fully integrated, but
According to
when somebody who is
the
relative,
Jungians, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
because they're looking at. I'm sorry to jump in. They're looking at individuation or enlightenment from the perspective of a single lifetime,
right,
and
right,
whereas
exactly,
Buddhists and others, they look at it in the context of many lives.
right, right. So yeah, so as we have those experiences, and as we become more and more integrated, the same impulses, the same drives, the same naughty things in our heads are going to still pop up. However, an integrated personality can see those things and not immediately identify with them,
Right.
not immediately say, oh, I've got to go do this now. The drive to, go have sex. Oh, well, I better go do it. An integrated personality can see that arise and can say, hey, that's not a bad idea. However, I need to go do something right now. I need to go grocery shopping, and I can
Well,
have sex later. Okay,
I wanna
great.
I
You know,
wanna share something. Another thing about individuation and enlightenment, and kind of like stages of that kind of that. It's kind of like what you said. Little things happening over time, so you're becoming more and more closer to that holistic view of the self and the
mhm,
universe.
mhm,
Like for instance, I have seen in myself where like and I'm somebody who's very, I'm a genuine person, I'm an authentic person, meaning if I uh don't like something, I'm not gonna pretend like I like it. I'll find a way to peacefully, nicely communicate how I feel. For example,
very
and
Taurian.
as somebody as somebody who really, I try really hard to be true to myself, meaning to act according to the truth of what I feel and who I am and blah blah blah, who I am. But even with the effort to be that way, like I apply effort, and there are times where I come to kind of crossroads, and I'm like, well, this is easier, but this is more, you know it's just, this is more authentic, I'll choose this, right? So this is my, I'm just saying, this is my, what I strive to. However, uh being that kind of a person, I still get things like insecurity, jealousy. I had a thing where like I would feel, for whatever reasons, there was like a backstory. I don't want to get into it now because it's like, where like I felt, what's the word? Oh, come on. Kind of less than next to this other person. What's
Mhm.
that word? And then the ego automatically feels. But the thing is, like, when these things come up, first of all, I have self-compassion. I have no problem seeing these things about myself. I'm like, oh, I'm like, oh, this is so curious. You can look at it like with curiosity. Instead of being like, oh my God, I'm a horrible person. No, it's just you're human. These things, we feel these things, it's fine. And then what you do, instead of bashing yourself or trying to sweep it under the rug or pretend like it's not there, or like, masking, you go back and you're like, oh, like I know, logically, that when that stuff arises, that's ego grasping, and that only arises when ego feels threatened, insecure,
Mhm.
etc. Right? So then I'm like, oh, what's the matter? Like, and then I literally talk to myself in my head, and I'm like, it's okay. Well, like I
Mhm.
give myself what I need to feel better. I don't act out the jealousy and go and try to ruin somebody's reputation because I'm jealous or something like that. It's like I use that as information that's really important, because that information, that means that that part of me, by the way, that felt inadequate, that was the word I was looking for,
Mm.
inadequate or jealous, that's not me. That's some part of me. You don't have to identify. That's just a voice. It's just some part that hasn't been integrated from a long time ago, that's poking its head and it's saying, hey, I need some love and care. I need, like, to be
Mhm.
acknowledged. And then you go and you're like, oh, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. I'll give you, like, what do you need? Let me give you what you need. And there
It's a
is
big
this
hug.
whole, and I created this. Like, I just created this. It was just a logical thing to do. And I have to say, it really works wonders, because you do that enough times, you're not really gonna be burdened by some of these things. Like, when it's just information, so treat it as such. It's information you need, you know uh, to integrate, you use the information to adjust your inner narratives, your vocabulary, how you talk to yourself, how you treat yourself, what you do. You adjust that, you fix it, and eventually it's not gonna come up anymore. It will come to a place where you will no longer experience these things, because you've healed all of those little parts. That's how we move towards enlightenment and integration,
Right.
individuation.
That's what Jung said, and I think even Aleister Crowley echoed that, and said, this process, whether we're talking about enlightenment or individuation or initiation, it's a process of bringing the unconscious to light. And I think that's such a wonderful way of thinking of it, of shedding a light, and once you see some of these big figures that are hiding in the shadows, they're there, you can start working with them. You can prepare yourself for what happens when they come forward. You can, you start to integrate. Really, it's a perfect word for it,
Mm,
because you start to learn your inner
landscape.
landscape. Yeah, yeah, perfect. Good one.
Yeah, and I also wanted to say, it's very interesting how what you just said, right, is super valid, right? Shedding kind of lighting the lamp in the darkness of unconscious, so we can start to see, right? Uh, and there is this another way to think of it, and both they seem like they're contradictory, but they're not really. And that's because we're using language which is very dualistic. But, like, another way to think of it is, like, we're not supposed to make our darkness light, because dark, it's like night. Would you want to go away with night forever and never have night again? No, I love the evening, because then you see the stars and you see the moon. So, like, the idea is about you know integrating the darkness, so that it's not something that's harmful and automatic and fear-based and pathological.
Oh,
So, like, with destroying, it's a concept. I mean, and that's, let's talk about magic for a second. People talk about black magic, white magic. There is no black, white magic is just what it is, right? It's just, there is no describing thing that makes it this or that. It's how you use it. Same in the same way.
mhm.
Like, you can use hammer to build a house or break somebody's bones.
Well
I
said.
use my destructive. Yeah, I have a very strong destructive nature, as you know, Tom, because you know me really well. I'm like a little, Balkan savage, Serbian savage.
With
I'm half Serbian, half Croatian. So
strong
I like to
opinions
say,
about bananas.
I like to say that I'm a kind of good balance between Serbian savage and Croatian sort of civilized person, because Croatians are somehow more like this, and Serbs are, or that's my, anyway, my way. I'm both. I love, fully embrace both parts of myself. But, like, for me, the destructive part of my personality is activated when I work out, and it's like there is so much. I feel like I could kill somebody with my bare hands, but, like, when you work out and you spend that energy, it's very interesting. That's another paradoxical thing. It's like, you spend energy when you work out, but when you come out of it, or at least me, I feel so much more energized and clean and clear, because you just pushed, you used your destructive impulse to push out any kind of whatever unprocessed pain or whatever the hell, you want to, like, you get it out. So again, destructiveness can be used for great things. So darkness, I love the dark
Definitely. I think
aspect.
an interesting analogy just came to mind too. And I learned this from one of my teachers, basically, but this idea that being enlightened is not a state where you know everything, you constantly, you're reading everybody's mind and everything, and it's just that you can juggle it all at the same time. I, I don't think that's the way it would look. And frankly, like if I could understand exactly what enlightenment looks like, then I would be there, But as as I progress, I'm learning more about it. And I think enlightenment means more that in the moment, the right choices arise, like intuitively. You
And
know
clarity.
what is going to be the best solution for each moment.
Clarity, yeah.
And exactly.
What
So,
is best, what is most beneficial. Like if you see another person and they're having an experience, you will know you're not going to respond by being triggered,
right.
because you're above that, because you know who you are, therefore your ego grasping is loosened, so somebody else insulting you won't do anything to you.
Mm-hmm.
But also there is Tibetan Buddhism has a very specific, because there are different, okay, now we can talk about there are different levels of enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk about what is the ultimate level. According to Tibetan Buddhism, they're very specific about what that means. And it's very interesting because, like, you don't see a lot, or I have not run into, outside of Tibetan Buddhism, I didn't really run into a lot of descriptions where they tell you exactly what it means when you reach total enlightenment, like the end of the
Mm-hmm.
road. Well, the end of the road, I don't know if that's the way, that's a dualistic concept of
Yeah,
presenting it,
there's
but like,
no end.
no, just like, no, but there is a point where you shed all the ignorance, and
That's
that's what
true.
Buddhahood is.
That's true.
And so I would like to talk about that a little bit. Oh, by the way, I saw a question for Jim earlier, asking me about my personal journey. I don't really love to talk about myself, but I will share things that were part of my life and journey that can help others on the path. And also, that's something we're not going to get into that now, because we're talking about this now. But I've taken I saw your question, and I will respond to it at some point. So yeah, Tom, let's start by talking about the three bodies. And
Well, oh, three bodies.
I mean, yeah, or how do you want to go about it?
Yeah, so my teacher, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he taught that it's called the three doors of satisfaction, and that there's three goals. The first goal, and which is having better rebirths, having better lives in the future. The second goal is liberation from karma, liberation from suffering. And the third goal is enlightenment. So this is usually the way you'll find it presented in most of the Tibetan Buddhist literature, especially this distinction between liberation and enlightenment. Now, liberation is a step on the path to enlightenment, and so it subsumes it and is of the same flavor, you could even say. It's very similar to this idea of Kensho and Satori in Zen. We have to be careful not to over-identify, like comparing two systems, because there are always going to be some differences, but it's fairly similar. But this idea of liberation is that it's achieving the state of an arhat, which is, in some terminology, is a type of nirvana. It is a type of Buddhahood. But you're not done yet. And the idea is that you've graduated to a higher self, like Lana was talking about, kind of a smaller ego, a bigger ego. This is a needle moving event in your life that makes a change in your personal identity. that it has shed all of those elements that are self-centered, out of fear, out of a desire just to be happy and avoid suffering. This liberation means we're technically off the wheel of karma, that we are able to make choices for ourselves, and we're not subject only to biological
No more
imperatives.
compulsions, no more
Right,
impulsive thing, no more, yeah, nothing, nothing automatic that's
right,
part of the kind of human animal thing is gone.
right.
and
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 then
yeah,
then
go
you
ahead.
keep going, and then you really refine the compassion piece, and you refine the emptiness, the wisdom piece that understands the nature of reality, emptiness. These two culminate in a further experience called full enlightenment. And in this experience, supposedly, one achieves omniscience, omnipresence, and omnipotence. But of course, we can see that if a Buddha really exists and has achieved those things, why haven't they enlightened me yet? So there's this dialogue that it's still a personal
Yeah.
responsibility, that you can't ask for somebody else to
Well,
do
yeah,
work for.
nobody can save us. Nobody, you save yourself. I mean, teachers show up, they share teachings, they share, knowledge, they give you instructions on what to do. And then
Right.
it's up to us because we have to the transformation happens by doing the work, because doing the work primes us to just perceive things in a different way. Like, this is why spiritual practice is so important. Yes, it is like repetitive and boring, but you have to go past that, because in repetition something happens. There
Hmm.
were a couple of questions. I want to talk about the three bodies of the Buddha.
Yeah.
There were a couple of things. um, is the shadow really similar to the night? A shadow follows you behind when you walk towards the horizon facing the sun. These are all from Hector. This is just okay. This is very like playing with words, and like I'm talking about night. I'm talking about dark aspect of personality versus the light. Like yin and yang. Shadow is part of it. I mean, it doesn't matter. Yeah, shadow follows you when you face the sun. These are all poetic concepts, and you can create things, but we're talking about polarities, so you can divide everything into polarities and into can you talk about what would trigger the enlightenment? Living righteously, meditating. We can talk about that. I mean, one of them, meditation. I think it's safe to say you cannot grow without meditation. And I mean, of course, I know there are people. And also, can I just say something? I have a lot of clients that I see, and sometimes we talk about things, and I can't tell you how many people tell me like, oh, I tried to meditate, but I can't do it, so I stopped. I'm like, what do you mean? You like, you're like, yeah, I'm not good at it. I can't, I can't, because you're supposed to focus on your breath, and like, I can't, my mind keeps wandering. I'm like, that's the point. Nobody can meditate. The idea is like you start and you see like your mind is like a wild horse, and you're supposed to focus on your stupid breath or whatever, on your mind or on your body sitting there, or you can visualize an image and hold that. Whatever you choose, these are just tools to make, to teach mind how to stay where you want it. And of course, the first time you do anything, you're like, clumsy, you can't make it happen. It's kind of like saying, I tried to dance ballet, but I realized I'm not good at it, so I stopped. It's like, you're not going to be ballerina after first 2 seconds of trying. That's like ridiculous concept. But we have we understand this in the context of ballet. You understand that if you put your hands on piano, you're not going to play Mozart on day one. We get that, right? But how do we lose all common sense when it comes to spirituality? Like, spirituality is follows, the same laws as everyday life.
Hmm.
Actually, the methods. It's like you start. I remember when I started meditating, whatever, a long time ago, I would sit down and I would start watching my breath. And then it would literally be like my mind would wander, and it would be like 5, sometimes 10 minutes later, where I'm like not even realizing that I've wandered off. And I come back and I'm like, oh my God, I was supposed to watch my breath. it's like the mind is just disaster, right? For
Mhm.
everybody. And then you practice, and eventually you get to a point where you like, as soon as you kind of drop off the object of meditation, you realize like pretty quickly, and you come back, and then eventually we'll come to a place where like you can hold it on. You could do counting method where you like count to 10 and then
Mhm.
reset to 1. Now that can also happen automatically, and you can be distracted while still counting. That's another, the ego has many methods to trick us.
And
But
there's a lot of different techniques of meditation too.
we're
The
gonna
the
do that.
fundamentally there's either the overwhelm or underwhelm systems. Most meditation that we're presented with is about clearing the mind, blanking the mind, not thinking. You can see how that's underwhelming.
Hmm.
You're trying to stop the mind. The other process is overwhelming the mind. And that's by visualizing things, trying to hold them without wavering, and overexerting the mind. In the same way, it causes this, hyper focus that leads to a moment of
Hmm.
selflessness, hopefully.
Hmm. Yeah.
I think, and,
Um,
and this is kind of, it taps into a lot of what you're talking about. And I think with the individuation process, where you can start creating symbols, creating personalities and entities coming from the shadow, coming from the parts of the consciousness that we don't normally see. And this is where we can start interacting with them.
mhm. And also, so my intention is not to go too deep into the methods, because we're going to make another live for that.
Mhm.
Tom is really great for the subject. I mean, he's like a really great meditator, and he understands in depth, very subtle things and techniques and nuances of meditation, and he's helped me a great deal with these. But I do want to say that all of us are like a disaster when we start doing something new. We can't, and but over time things really happen. Over time, the same person who would wander off for 5 or 10 minutes at a time without even realizing is now somebody who can like stay focused for quite some time before wandering off, or before like losing it. And then I never really, it never happens for me anymore to wander off so much that I'm like so spaced out. No, it doesn't happen anymore. Mind becomes sharper. This stuff, it works. It's just like, you go practice gymnastics for 10 years, you're going to be a pretty good gymnast. But we think again, we have these like silly expectations. It's like we don't want to put the work in, but we expect to be masters. You have
Yeah.
to. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like you go to school to become an engineer. You don't just like become engineer because you're like, oh, I want to be. And equally, you can't just say I'm an engineer and that makes you an engineer, right?
That's
So
exactly.
you
And
gotta do the work.
I think that answers some of the questions I'm seeing pop up as well. Enlightenment, awakening, liberation, individuation, none of them are a black and white place. You're not fully enlightened. Maybe somebody is, but most of the people we meet are not. It's a gradual process, and you have hallmarks along that road. Um, so one person's awakening could maybe be just a step, and maybe they didn't go any further with it, but it was powerful enough to help them change their life. Maybe they had stuff to share, and it made them into a prophet, or a seer of some kind. But that doesn't necessarily mean they've done the whole job. And comparing where they are on their path is very difficult to compare with somebody on another person on their path. Like you're saying, an architect, you may have a certain hallmark where I'm now physically capable of building a whole 3-story building in my head. I couldn't do that before.
Mhm.
Now I can do it. I can make it work. If you go out and draw the blueprints, it'll work. But
Right.
it doesn't mean I can build a 30-story building in my mind yet.
Not
So
yet. Yet.
you keep growing, you get deeper and deeper into that rhythm.
And another thing I want to throw in, which is really important, insights that are groundbreaking happen to me always while I do my practice. few of them happened when I was like on ayahuasca or LSD, but I don't want to,
In the
you know,
bathroom.
that stuff is also not for everybody. But I want to say that like when you do that repetitive thing, I mean, I have, you know, my Buddhist sadhana, you're supposed to do it for the rest of your life, every day, the same thing. There are a few different levels to it, but like, and you know, you could be doing something for 5 years, and in year six you see, you suddenly, it comes to you that like you get a deep realization of what you're doing, like the meaning starts to
Mhm.
unfold also in that
Click.
space of doing your practice meditating. That becomes a space where, however you want to, you know, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, the divine will drop hints. And it's not that like, I'm sure they're dropping hints all the time, but we're so dull. It's like, you can't, you know, but you're refining your mind, you know, you're kind of like calming it and you're becoming more receptive. And I swear, like these things, you know, this is where we get information, you know, in our practice is just so important. Um, let me just quickly see. Would meeting your twin flame potentially trigger enlightenment? First of all, I don't believe in twin flame. I have to say, and really quickly, why? Because people change moment to moment. Somebody may be your twin flame in the moment, and then 5 years later, you like do this. You know, people evolve in their own way. We're all individuals. It's very, you know, and also enlightenment is a personal thing. You know, I mean, one person can help. Uh, it definitely matters who we're surrounded with. If you're with like somebody who's very wholesome and evolved, it will rub off on you. If you're hanging out with garbage people that all they're doing is gossiping and stealing and doing stuff like that, it will rub off on you. So company matters, you know. So it can help your growth if you're with the right kind of person, but that's not the actual direct specific cause that triggers your enlightenment. Your enlightenment is a result of what you do and your karma is basically what you did in the past. So what's the difference? Okay, here, Tom, what's the difference between enlightenment and awakening? That's a little bit, awakening is very general term, but let's talk about, should we talk about like different levels of kind of, I mean, we talked a bit about it, but one thing
I
I want
think
to say.
we've covered it, but I think, you know,
Yeah.
it's semantics really, which terms we use for which part of the process.
Okay, so here is one thing, because we're multi-layered, think about this. We have like, let's just create a model, like a fantasy, right? To describe a concept. Let's say we have 5,000 dimensions of our personality, right? So it's like, you know, our emotional, our physical, our like, you know, just different people have different skills, different, right? So there are ways in which we can evolve in one way, but then stay pretty uninvolved in another way. Does that make sense? And then, like, here is one idea: psychological integration. So, psychological individuation and spiritual enlightenment have a lot of things in common, but there are also things that are very specific. So, like, let's take an example: Chogyam Trungpa, a Buddhist master who was, you know, you read his books. I mean, this guy was amazing. I love Chogyam Trungpa, but he was also problematic. You know, he had drinking issues and whatnot. Um, and I actually studied with Buddhist psychotherapists in a program for, in a couple of different programs, and we discussed this in particular. And there is a, you know, they kind of emphasize that there is a difference between psychological sort of development and spiritual, and that you want to do both. Like you can be spiritually evolved and have a lot of insights and have wisdom, but you can still have psychological hangups that come from some, you know, traumatic thing or whatever in your childhood, from some like kind of something that's like part of your compulsive automatic thing that you haven't dismantled with your spiritual practice. So you want to
Right.
do both. Yeah. So there are you know, and yeah, so that's why there are different levels and different, you know, they're like multi-layered. Now let's talk about the three bodies of the Buddha. For the third part is the third request. Because so to talk about full, total, perfect, pure enlightenment as described, Buddhahood. Let's just call it Buddhahood. Like you have so many stages between where we are now and total enlightenment. Let's first talk about what that means. So if you become a Buddha, first of all, you do not develop on physical reality. Your consciousness, you're fully operating in the context of energy. Like your consciousness is energy.
Yeah.
And because, as we know, physics tells us that everything around us, even though it looks solid, when you zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, it's like atoms, and it's like ultimately it's just vibrating energy, right? And uh, Buddhas. So let's talk about three bodies of the Buddha. So Buddha, yeah, you go. Sorry. Okay. Do you want to go or
I'm
should I go?
trying.
Am I putting on the
So
spot?
they in Tibetan Buddhism, it we are perceived as having human bodies, human minds, but we also have subtle bodies and subtle minds. And these correspond roughly to astral bodies or,
Energy body.
there's the Argoides or the Logos, or, you can even call it highest or holy guardian angel. There's a number of things you could call it. But this kind of subtle energetic body and mind that cause the cohesion on the physical level for things to actually work. And you could look at Tree of Life and things like that. But the Dalai Lama himself actually said the subtle body and the subtle mind are inextricably linked, and they are the ultimate nature of a person. They are our Buddha nature. So the closer and more that we can come to understand and visualize and identify with that subtle aspect of ourselves, the closer we become to our true integrated personalities.
And also, so basically, part of the spiritual practice is for us to sort of step into, or maybe it's not the right way of saying it, but like develop our capacity to operate in this sort of and that's what Buddhist Vajrayana did. Buddhism has different sort of levels and tiers of teachings and practices. The highest level is Vajrayana or Tantra. And I'm sorry to say, but Tantra is not about sex. Tantra is about Tantra
You,
teachings are
yeah.
advanced teachings, right? Because you have to have all this sort of preliminary, first of all, understanding on a conceptual level of like reality and so forth. And then also you have to do practices to kind of go away with like super gross levels of delusion, and you have to get to a point of like being able to kind of control your mind a little bit. You're not just like a mess, because Tantra ultimately teaches us how to step into our light body, how to make it stronger, how to develop it, and it's all happening on a very kind of astral level. And it's a very advanced technology. One day in the future, not yet, but we're gonna dive into Tantra. There's so many misconceptions out there about it, but Tantra is alchemy. It's transmutation. It's transmutation of like desire energy into enlightened energy of the kind of clear light mind and body, right? I don't know if I'm like using these words in a so
I'd say simply said, Tantra means union. And what it's
union
really
with our
mean is
ultimate.
you're uniting with the ultimate. And almost like Sufism, where I think it's Fana, they talk about the annihilation of the small ego in order to become one with God.
Yeah, it's same with like becoming one with our holy guardian angel happening in Tiferet. So it's like slowly. So actually, what can Buddha do when somebody becomes a fully enlightened Buddha, right? And they finally leave their physical body behind. And by the way, when we talk about the tree of life, real quick, there is this concept that we cannot enter the gate of Bina right? Because there is Keter, Chokmah, Bina. Those are the three supernals, and then down below are kind of like uh, other Sephiroth, ending with the Malkuth, the physical domain. We cannot enter the gate of Bina while embodied unless the person is a prophet, which means, I mean, it just means somebody who's very highly developed, right? They can enter that
Very
level while
integrated.
still embodied. Yeah,
Mhm,
yeah.
mhm.
So in the same way, anyway, so when so fully enlightened Buddha, after leaving, the material body, continues to operate fully conscious. And because the Buddha is like the master of the universe, he's the master of energy, right? He's in full control over manifestations. And because everything is energy, Buddhas can manifest as anything or anybody, anywhere, in more than one form, in as many forms as possible, as we wish, as they wish. So basically no limitation. But however, one thing they cannot do is they cannot make us enlightened. We have to do that ourselves. They will
Yeah.
manifest, and there is this concept that, like, if you see an enemy, put the enemy on the crown of your head, because the enemy is teaching you, is showing you your mind. So like if somebody shows up and they say something mean, instead of being angry at them, recognize that, like, oh wow, they're showing me what I have to work on.
I could be
So what
perfect.
so one way to be really skillful about it is when the enemy shows up, you can think like, oh, because Buddhists have skillful means, they know exactly how to trigger events or reactions that will lead us into kind of integration, right? So, you can think, oh, this is the Buddha manifesting as my enemy. He's trying to tell me something, show me something, So it's like a cool way. So that's like a pretty kind of out there thing. And it sounds kind of crazy. But when you look at physics, it's really not that crazy. I think we've been going on for a while, and I'm thinking that we could do part 2 on this, because there is a lot we didn't touch on. We didn't get to the Western Hermetic thing and the Tree of Life, and there's a bunch of other things.
I think
Um,
I
yeah.
got a lot more notes here.
Yeah, so we'll do part 2 of this. You guys, in the meanwhile, please send me your questions. Send us your questions. You can add Tom. His
Lamp for the
account is
past.
relatively new, but he's posting Lamp for the Path. We'll be doing more of these things together. We'll be collaborating a lot more. So I think, let me just quickly see, whoops, if there's any like question. Eckhart Tolle has spontaneous awakening triggered by extreme suffering, so it can happen spontaneously. Well, that's something I was thinking about today. And Tom, when you mentioned instantaneous enlightenment, things don't happen randomly. It could be spontaneous for him, but he spent a lifetime practicing, and
And it
maybe
doesn't
previous
mean
lifetimes,
he's
in
done.
previous lifetimes.
Yeah,
You're not gonna be
it
just
doesn't mean
like,
he's done.
yeah. Plus, it's not, yeah. Plus, yeah. That's just like, oh, one layer of ignorance removed, 5 million more to go, 10 more eons of work, So that thing that, like, oh, I'm just gonna sit here and wait for, enlightenment to happen. It's not gonna happen like that. You gotta take things into your own hands. You gotta, let me see really quickly. Yeah, I think that's it. I think we covered. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. This is a long one. We're gonna stop. Tom, do you have any other comments?
Thank you for the opportunity to babble.
Thank you. Well, I wouldn't call it babbling. All right. Thank you, everybody. I will save this and post it to both my YouTube and Instagram. I find it's a little bit tricky to watch these on Instagram. It's very buggy, so I don't recommend it. Maybe I'll just, yeah, anyway. So, yeah, that's it. That's all I have to say. Much love to
Thank you.
everybody. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Have a great day.
Bye.